So welcome back to our studio. Now we're going to cover a topic which is not in this year's Congress program. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about meeting format and program design. They say that if you don't change 10% every 10 years, you've got to change 100%. If you don't change 10% every year, you have to change 100% every 10 years. Meetings have looked pretty much the same for 100 years, I think. And the question is it not time to change the format of our traditional congresses? With us to discuss this, we've got Ruud Janssen from TNOC. Ruud is, I would say, one of the world-leading experts in meeting format design, and he doesn't design any boring conferences. We've got Ben Hainsworth from the European Society of Cardiology. There we go. And I know that the congresses you do, they have a number of different formats.
Indeed.
And we want to talk to you about that. Let's start with you, Ben. Tell us first a little bit about who you are and what you do and what's your association.
Yeah, my name is Ben. I work at the ESC, European Society of Cardiology, which is one of Europe's biggest associations. We have the luck to have a headquarters. We have our own in-house PCO, among many other expert teams, and we've been organising primarily the ESC Congress since for 20 years in our headquarters.
And how big is your in-house Congress team?
We have a devoted team, really, of events people of 35. But there's over 100 other people who are doing various other activities, of which many support the Congress, education, IT, marketing, and so on.
Yeah. And one of your congresses is one of the biggest ones around, at least in Europe, isn't it?
It is the biggest in Europe, and I believe it's the third largest in the world.
And what does that mean in numbers?
30,000 people
30,000
regularly.
People.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about designing the formats for a medical congress. Do you do it live? Do you do it virtual? Do you do it hybrid? Do you do presentations or discussions or interactions, or what are the things you play with?
Yeah, I mean, we don't try to recreate the Congress every year, but the Congress is evolving. I mean, we're now a multi-generational event. We're far more international than we used to be. So we have to constantly evolve not only the content, but the way that we present that content and the way that we involve the audience in our ongoings. I think it's probably one of the keyest words, most important things, is to really get that participation. I think the days of lectures of one person standing there behind the lectern speaking very solemnly as though doing a university lecture for an hour and a half doesn't really work anymore. It's good for some things, for keynote lectures and so on. It has its value, but I think people now are expecting a far more interactive experience, be it virtual or face-to-face.
And do you do hybrid virtual congresses?
We do. I think that compared to many other organisations, we do a lot, but I still consider it to be somewhat experimental, and it certainly hasn't become a core element of our business model, so to speak. But we are experimenting and pushing the boundaries and seeing what is appropriate, what works, what really creates value, or what, on the other hand, might actually alienate people or completely miss the point. So we're evaluating.
Let's move to you, Ruud. This is your everyday life and consultancy to create sometimes quite crazy formats, and we're going to have an autopsy, I think.
Yes.
But not in his world type of autopsy, is it? It's not a human autopsy.
We'll be testing a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is, does user-generated content deliver value for all stakeholders? And that will be the hypothesis, and we'll be literally slicing up and dicing up a conference that took place last month of the European Society for Radiology, and we have their creative director, Andreas Diesenreiter, and together we will put on our lab coats and start dissecting. This was actually inspired by a session designed by Eric de Groot at the Fresh conference in Copenhagen. Some time ago, and what we want to show is that repurposing things that are done in different ways and recombining the elements is some of the magic that people have at their disposal. And the exciting thing is, besides the internet, I think events are one of the only, let's say, horizontals that covers pretty much any topic and every topic in the world. It's up to us.
There's a congress for everything.
There's a congress for everything. People meet around everything. When there's problems, when there's joy, when there's all sorts of things. What we kind of need to figure out is, what are those components and those elements that we can use, right? How can we prepackage them? How can we use them effectively? How we can take the learning from one place? Because sometimes experimentation can be a lot of fun. Sometimes it can be very painful. And I think what we have to do is take the aggregate learnings, do some educated content and scientific-based content, or whether this delivers value or not, and then apply the things that do work and scale them up into different regions.
One of my favorite sayings I have from you: if nothing goes wrong, you're not experimenting hard enough.
Absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a special experimental format that you're doing here now this afternoon at the Association Congress. But in general, how do you see that meeting formats are evolving? What is happening today, and what are the things that people maybe should be doing today?
Well, but Ben alluded to it, I think, when you said, multi-generational, we get a different set of, different geographic coverage of people coming from different areas and participating in different ways. This implies directly that the function of communication is changing. And what I like to explore is how the function of communication and some of the do's and don'ts in live versus online, but also in formats like the single lecture, microphone-driven presentation that we all learned in school for the first 12 years of our formal education, is so ingrained in the way that we learn, is that maybe parts work well like that. What we also know is that people get bored of repetition. And what I try to do when we're looking at formats and we're trying to change formats, it's not change for the sake of change, but it's designing something that will create the learning on a personal level, so people actually change their behavior as a result of that, which is your sweet spot in the ROI of that stakeholder. Yeah. The hardest part, and I have to commend the team here at this event, we came up with some pretty crazy things that we asked them. We asked for Russian babushka dolls, we asked for lab coats. We needed something that was able to support a gentleman of almost 2 meters tall to be rolled into the room under a white blanket. All sorts of crazy things. And
sorry, so you're working on a human being, are you? Is he dead or alive?
That's the question. That's what we're testing.
At the moment.
That is what we're testing.
Okay.
As a matter of,
let's leave the experimental stuff. Let's go back to what.
But the point is,
the
supply chain and everybody that's involved in this needs to be able to materialize it or not. The onus is on a lot of the speakers or those that provide the content to come up with different ways of delivering that content. That's where the challenge is. I think our biggest hurdle, our weakest pivot in the chain is actually those that are the content deliverers. And how do we help them? How do we guide them? How do they design things that effectively bring the information across?
But is the initiative on the speakers, or is the initiative really with the organisers to provide the better formats? What you say about
I think that it would be safe to say that from our perspective, obviously we're bearing in mind the stakeholders such as the leadership, the institution, if you like. But really, at the events, I think that we have to evolve towards meeting perhaps the unexpressed, but the wishes and the expectations of the people who are spending their time, energy to come to the Congress. That's my primary concern. We know more or less what we want to say. The association has its values, it wants to express its best practice and so on. But how to do that in the most effective way for the people who are spending scarce resources to be there. And I think in today's environment, there's more and more connections are being made virtually. So there are far more interactions going on between individuals, but when they actually go to the physical event, and they will continue to do so, their expectations are higher. They're going there as individual people, and they want really to have high quality, high value interactions there, and that is our responsibility as well.
And again, you say they want to have high quality interactions rather than being spoken at. So interaction really is the key when we look at our formats.
And I think the distinction between a lecture area, a poster area, a restaurant is disappearing. And I think that the whole design of the whole Congress is becoming something which has to be conducive to free exchange and comfort and pleasure and experience, feeling belonging, those kind of words.
Well, we have a bit of that here with the exhibition and the lunch and the studio and everything. Everything's happening in the same place.
I think a lot has to do with any stakeholder that's kind of looking through the camera lens, right? So who's on the other end? Hello, how are you? The question is, how do you make that person smile? Right? How can we grab their? How can we make sure that they're interested and that they're connected? They feel connected. They feel acknowledged. Somebody's time is precious. Ben just mentioned that, and the way people consume time and the way that they allot their time is also changing the generations. One of the experiments I'm doing in real life actually is for an event upcoming in September for the Organ Transplantation Society, European Society for Organ Transplants, and the young generation there is actually inspired to do something different. But different for the sake of being different is, the question is, does that create extra value?
Mm-hmm. Not different for the sake of being different.
And for what proportion of your audience?
And for what proportion of the audience? So here's the plan, right? This is, don't tell the participants yet.
I'm not going to ask you if you're going to do an autopsy at the organ transplant.
No, definitely not. This is going to be different, and Elling, you actually experienced one of these formats, you know, the Pecha Kucha, which you've done at the event camp Twin Cities some time ago. That is a format that inspired one of the young transplant professionals to actually go in a dialogue. She now went out to the Pecha Kucha night in Berlin to explore this format. And she just created a video about it, and I'm happy to share that later on Twitter. And she will be designing, first of all, an evening for just the under 35s that will be invited, and the others are not invited, which will be the general rehearsal the evening before that these Pecha Kuchas are being presented on very specific topics. 20 slides times 20 seconds, 6 minutes 40, with an intro in a haiku format, so the presenter is introduced in a different way. And this will be one of the ways that the young transplant professional will present their contributions to the trade in a different format, in a different way, but also exposing themselves, because it's very difficult to prepare a Pecha Kucha, as I'm sure you'll acknowledge.
I know. So this is a way of bringing them in to be active, not only participants in networking, but also doing
it's practicing what
speaking and sharing experiences.
If that's what they ask, then they have to contribute in that way.
And what do you think they'll be saying is different about that event when they're on the plane home? Really, as a memorable...
Substantially,
yeah. So we've identified that with some empathy maps and try to identify...
Empathy maps?
Yes. Are you familiar with empathy maps?
Not yet.
Okay. So we'll explore those a little bit further, because for me that is the way that you look at a participant, right?
Yes.
Isolated sensory perception. What do they physically see, right?
Yes.
What do they think?
Yes.
What do they hear with their ears? What do they do with their body as a behavior that you can observe? And what are their pains and gains? And per stakeholder group, you kind of map that out, and you know what the behavior is before the event, and you know what the intended behavior could be after the event. Now, one of the challenges is, it's not about selecting a format, and in this case I'm experimenting with that group that selected the format, and I've asked the very same question. So why did you select that format? And what I really enjoyed about this is that they said, well, I don't have the answer to that problem, but I will go to the Pecha Kucha night and ask those that do Pecha Kuchas a lot and are enthusiastic about it, how I could use this tool to do what I do differently, but better, and not just differently. It's not different for the sake of different, but it's better, so that it really makes the message stick differently.
Time flies. This has given us a lot of food for thought. The world is going to be different in the future, no doubt. We're going to bump off Ben now. I'm sorry about that. We're going to bring someone else on, and we're going to ask Ruud to stay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
See you later. Yeah. And I'll be there for the
autopsy.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
Okay. So now we're going to bring on Hema Chowdhury. Hema is the producer for this congress.
Hi, Emma.
And Hema, when I first heard your title, the producer, I thought you were the person who would do all the technical stuff and the lights and everything. But I've learned since, in fact, certainly in the UK, the producer is a well-defined profession.
Indeed.
And you produce the programs.
That's right. That's right.
Well, tell us a little bit more about what do you do? How do you, you've got a blank sheet of paper, someone wants from you a congress, like this one, which you did brilliantly.
Thank you.
How do you go about that?
Well, you know who your target audience is, and you have a title. So you know who you want to attract, and you know the industry that you want to attract. What we try to do is get rid of any preconceived ideas of what the event should address, and go straight to our target market, which are the association executives, people like Ben, who's just left. Yeah. And we ask them what they would like to, if they were to attend an event, what they would like to know. What are their headaches? What keeps them awake at night? What are their business problems? So, for example...
So you spend a number of days on the phone with all these people?
A lot of time on the phone.
Where you start?
A lot of time on the phone, yeah. Yeah. And also being here as well. So, I'm asking them what we would do differently next year. You've got to be quite thick-skinned. You've got to take quite a lot sometimes. So, you get the good with the not so great. But it all helps. And ultimately, we want to keep growing the event, and we want to keep making it better and better every year.
So, but But don't you have also like a program committee, or is this just you and the phone and you decide everything?
No, not at all. It starts off with me and the phone, but yes, we do have a program committee. I work very closely with our executive director, Damien Hart. He's been in this industry for a very long time, so he knows a lot about it. And we also consult experts like Ruud. Ruud has given up quite a lot of his time to help us. It's a bit of both. We will define a program, we will have an idea of what it should look like, what sort of topics to address based on what people have said, and then we'll consult the experts, see if there's anything we've missed, any angles we should take or do differently.
But essentially you start with the target audience, with the participant, and you want to give them fewer sleepless nights. But isn't there also, an element where maybe they don't know what they don't know, and you should give them something that they, haven't identified yet?
Yep,
and you've got to get that from somewhere else.
There definitely is. I mean, for example, we've just had a session on social media, a really, really interesting session on social media. Most associations don't have their own private social network, and there are very few, and it's through research that we identify that there are social associations that invest in creating their own platform. So that's something that didn't come up through research. No one actually said, I want to know about how to create my own. Majority, I'd say, well into the 90-something%. In fact, probably I'd say about 95% of associations I've come across just use LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. So it's when you come across these interesting case studies, you think, well, let's put this in, and it's what enhances and adds value.
You're nodding, Ruud.
Yes, I'm an event junkie. And one of the things that I take as the litmus proof of what you just said is when event organizers succeed in selling out their events and creating something that is, let's say, not seen before or has a very specific success ratio. I'm always interested, and I want to find out why. Right? Why is it that is different from what it is? And I'd like to share an experience of an event that maybe was created by non-event experts and people that are completely blank, so to say. Start with a blank sheet of paper with a first event. This was an event that is called the Business Design Summit by Alex Osterwalder and Yves Pigneur and a whole team of people around them who've come up with a way of using events to develop concepts. And with workshops that I think very often in training are used effectively, now scaling this up to become a summit, just like getting a larger group of people together, what is the dynamic there and how does that function effectively? Now, that event sold out 6 weeks before. Participants paid €2,000 and the program was not published until the day before.
Cool. Give you extra time.
How does that work?
How does that work?
How does that work? I went to the conference, I paid €2,000. We're now mapping the whole customer journey from various perspectives. We're helping the team in identifying what we just said, the empathy map, so finding the business model and analyzing the content production, the service production, the ROI of the event, and because that's something that as entrepreneurs they think about naturally. And somehow they seem to know what their audience needs or wants more of. And this is probably the same difference between very successful TV formats and not so successful TV formats. I think the production angle, I think it's a very valid point. Production is extremely important. The production and also the daring to be bold in doing things in a slightly more aggressive and less conventional way.
How about that, Hema?
I agree. I mean, you've got to take some risks. You've got to take risks, and
well, you took one with this one, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, we'll see. I'm very excited. Yeah, and if you fall down, you learn from it. But people will remember it.
And I think also if you present it as an experiment, then everybody knows this might work and it might not, and you're part of the experiment.
And to be honest, like you said, you don't want death by PowerPoint. You do want to break it up, especially after lunch. You do want to make things, interactive, interesting, and fun as well. They've come to, everyone's come to learn, but at the same time, they've come to enjoy the experience as well. So you've got to provide both.
Then we come to the speaker and recruiting the speakers. How do you find the speakers? Is that part of that same process?
It is. Yep, it is. Well, again, it all starts off with the interviews that we do with our target market. find out what type of people they want to hear from, what type of case studies they want to hear. Often people have recommendations and you'd go away and look at those recommendations. So a lot of it does come through what people have said, magazines, looking out for, you know, interesting speakers, interesting case studies. I mean, I like a bit of both. I like the great case studies and I also like interesting characters who can, you know, again, make someone smile. So I think you need a few interesting characters in there as well. And, you know, sometimes if you're very lucky, you might have a few people contacting you saying, I've got a great story to share.
Okay,
so, yeah, that's
it's
nice.
got to fit into what you're looking for.
It's got to fit
exactly.
into what you're looking for, yeah.
And maybe many of those people who have interesting stories to share, they have experience of maybe having solved the problem that keeps someone else awake at night, but maybe they don't have so much experience as speakers or presenters. Is that a dilemma, or, you know, who do you go for? Do you go for the seasoned speaker who doesn't really know the topic, or do you go for the people who've actually lived it, you know, and had the experience?
Definitely you want to go for the people who've actually lived it and have had the experience.
Yeah.
You most definitely want to go for that, because if the content isn't there, then, you know, it doesn't matter how great the delivery is, but the content must be there. I mean, we usually find if someone's coming forward, you know, I don't think the shy, retiring person would ever come forward and say, I've got a great story to share in front of, 200 people, 300 people.
That's a good sign.
So it is usually a good sign. But, you know, we talk to them on the phone, we discuss the topic, so you do have a good idea on what they're going to be like.
What's your experience with, you know, many associations, they use speakers who are not trained professional speakers, and as Hema says, there's a great value in that. What can we do to help speakers along and help them, you know, perform better and communicate better what they have to say? Is that an element that maybe we should pay more attention to?
I think it's like asking my 9-year-old to drive a car. I think he'd love to do it.
Great.
He'd love to do it. I think he'll be pretty good at it. Only his feet are too short, right? So it's going to take a while for him to grow into that role. And surely, you know, another 9 years, and he will probably be driving that car. I think we shouldn't rush into this. We have to ease into this and lean into the moment of what these opportunities are, and celebrate some of the things that work very well, right? But also talk about the things that really failed or that didn't go well. Nobody wants to not look good, right? I've never met a speaker or somebody, you know, just like we were talking about the social, people love pictures of themselves. You know, it's just a fact. There's only one difference. People don't like the voice of their own sound. The sound of their own voice. I'm mixing it up. So when you hear yourself back, that's a very scary thing, for a lot of people. Now, I think your question was, how do we train these speakers, or what is the... I think if we ease speakers and give them time to ease into a format or to think about this a little bit differently, present it as a challenge, not as a given, right? To say, it's not your choice, here's what we do. If you'd like to join us. And, you know, let me reflect back on this. I know that, let's say for a fact, you're a very comfortable and professional speaker, yet when Adrian Seagar proposed at Event Camp Twin Cities this idea of Pecha Kucha, you jumped at the moment, and at the same time, there was a stretch, I think, of creating a Pecha Kucha, and in this case it was a specific format for all of the speakers, but it also created an ecosystem where everybody had the same problems to kind of grow into that role. And the audience was prepared for the fact that this was an experiment. And I think that's how you deal with it. Manage the customer
That makes it
expectations.
easier, of course, when you know you're party to an experiment. But the speakers want to look good, so if they have an offer for some help, maybe starting off with helping them with their presentations, or, you know, whatever help they feel they need to look better, they should all be thankful for that. Are they? Are they interested, or do they know it best
To be
themselves?
very, very honest, we get involved with the content side of things rather than how they deliver.
Yes,
We, completely honest, we just don't get involved with that side. You can have the most charismatic person who just freezes as soon as they get behind the lectern. And it's happened. We've had, not in this event, but in past events that I've worked on, very high level senior people who've got the content, who seem very confident, know exactly what they're talking about. In a meeting, their delivery is great, but have gone behind the lectern and it's just been, you know, a scary moment and frozen. It's happened.
It's the sort of thing you can't really plan for.
It's an extreme situation. I think that the good thing, the reassuring thing for our speakers is that our delegates are very understanding. You know, as long as the content is there, as long as there's something of value you've taken away from the content, you know, we're all peers, everyone's a peer. So yes, you know, it's great to watch the very charismatic speakers and hear what they've got to say, but most importantly, you've got to, you know, you've come here and you want to take away valuable insights that you can go and implement, and if you get that, then our delegates are very understanding.
And it's also a bit of the responsibility of the organisers to make sure that they make them feel comfortable, that they have a comfort monitor, that they are properly introduced, that there is a speaker's room to prepare, and there's a lot of sort of things that can make them feel more confident in that situation. Is that your experience, Ruud?
Yeah, and I think this is an example of, you know, the way that you condition that ecosystem of how the customer journey of this speaker or this moderator, or that's very determined for their mood. You know, people exude their mood. If they're in a good or a bad mood, then that reflects in the way that they present. So I think exemplary customer service is one of the critical things. A lot of meetings have mastered that very well. Others are still struggling. It's also a budgetary question, obviously. One of the things I think, let's say, just to go back to the speaker role and how can they change, it's I think what needs to be done, and what I think we're about to start creating very elaborately, is a whole set of tools that will enable you, although you're not a carpenter, to become a proficient builder of successful formats of delivery, right? So frameworks,
flat pack them.
Yeah, flat pack them, put them in a warehouse, and the ones that are successful, you can choose from which ones you want and actually repackage them with a very simple toolkit to put them together. This is something that we're currently working on, but in practice what it means is that you help somebody and guide them through a process, right? An event, building a story is not something that's easy to do. Those that have written a book know how difficult it is, right? But there are tools to build a good story, and there are tools to build a good session format. There are ways of slicing and dicing it into chunks of methodologies, timings, components, that if you look at the big problem, it's big, but put it into smaller modules and all of a sudden it becomes feasible.
And somebody can present you with a toolbox and you can start putting it together. That's the future.
I think that's a way that we can help speakers or improve specific formats. It's also a way that you can structure discussions more elegantly. Let me give, can I give one example?
One very quick one.
One last one.
Yeah.
So last week I was doing a workshop with Mike van der Vijver in Milan with Italians, and we were testing hybrid event design and live meeting design. And we did an actual exercise where people owned a chocolate company, and the Italians had to convince the Swiss of what 2 chocolates out of 5 they were going to select. They could use the hybrid meeting format and test that in the afternoon, and have a live meeting format and actually deliver that in the afternoon to the other group. One of the remarks that really struck me was the Italians said they never realized how difficult it is to speak sequentially, one after the other instead of all together. And hybrid forced them to speak one at a time. So sometimes cultural components can be filtered out through techniques. You know, this is an insight of last week.
The unexpected there, yeah.
But also structuring that discussion in a 50-minute time slot made them think so carefully about how do we structure that 15 minutes.
Very good.
And ultimately they delivered a very, interesting format.
Developing a better content.
Give them constraints, they'll become creative, then the format will turn out a lot better.
That will have to be the final word. Thank you, Hema.
Thank you,
Ruud.
Thank you, Elling.